The Soviet Union collapses, and all of a sudden, all these states are freed from authoritarian rule, and they all get the same basic economic advice. Open up to trade, privatize your state-owned industries, end price controls, and yet the outcomes are totally different. Some countries got rich, others descended into corruption, poverty, and war. So why? Well, what I found researching this video is really wild. We actually know the recipe to make a country rich. Not only do we know it now, we knew it 50 years ago, and then we just forgot about it. So today, I'll cover what happened with the post-Soviet reforms, the recipe for growth, how it explains Poland versus Russia, and why we forgot how to make countries rich. I'm Matt Hill, I'm an economics professor. I did a ton of research for this video. Not all of it could fit in the video, so I've linked my sources in a Substack. If you want to dive deeper, I recommend going there. All right, let's go. Hold on a second. So I'm editing the Poland video and I realize, hey, this is like a video about Poland and has lots of academic research, but it doesn't have any actual Poland. So I thought maybe I should go to Poland. And then I realized I can't afford that. So I did the next best thing. I hired random Polish people off the internet. So are you a random Polish person from the internet?
Yeah, definitely, yes.
Yeah, I'm a random Polish person from the internet.
So Andres, Victoria, and Timo were nice enough to watch the cut of the video and react to it, and I've interspersed those reactions throughout. Let's go. In the mid-20th century, Russia had an empire. They absorbed previously independent states into the Soviet Union, and they controlled a lot of Eastern European countries via their military. Across these countries, the market economy was rejected. The government was the visible hand. They set the prices, and they owned all the major companies.
They owned not major companies, but all companies, actually. All companies were owned by the state.
It was a totally top-down system built on dreams of utopia, but by the 1980s, that central planning was collapsing into absurdity.
When you were in big city like Warsaw or Krakow, there was not enough food for people. My father told me that when he was a child, he went like 200 kilometers with train just to get fridge.
So he had to go all this way just to get a fridge? 200 kilometers away?
It was a tips, like they told surrounding area, this date there will be delivery of fridges, and if you want one, you have to go like 200 kilometers just to get one. Then they would have to wait in line, and they were getting back not on the truck or car or something like this, but with the trains. So it was two separate trains, then bus, and then last step of the way was horse with wagon, and then it was fridge on those wagons. In case of appliances, it was really hard to get something.
Fridges on horse-drawn carts are just the tip of the iceberg of how dysfunctional these economies were. For example, shoe factories produced more than enough shoes for people, but because there was no feedback mechanism, they produced the wrong sizes and people went shoeless. Sounds bad, but at least they were making something. In Uzbekistan, officials just fabricated harvests and then used the money to bribe everyone to keep quiet. Also sounds bad, but at least they weren't destroying things. That is what was happening in the north, where fishermen were killing whales just to meet weight quotas. Nobody actually wanted the meat. So a bunch of whales died just to satisfy bureaucrats.
Those whales problem was probably in Russia, yeah, because we don't have whales in Poland.
So by 1989, the Soviet Union was starting to crumble. Eastern Bloc countries broke away, the Baltics were agitating for independence. In Moscow, there was one last gasp by hardliners to maintain power with a coup attempt in 1991. But their tanks were stopped by stop signs, literally. The soldiers were so uncommitted, they just lollygagged around. Eventually, the ringleaders got really drunk and gave power over to Boris Yeltsin, who ironically later would be known for getting drunk all the time. So by 1992, it was all over. The Soviet Union broke up and the Eastern Bloc countries were free to do as they wanted. Enter the reformers. In Poland, that was Leszek Balcerowicz. As a boy, he ran cross-country, and as a young man in the 1980s, he was looking for a hobby. He tried a few out before settling on completely redesigning the Polish economy in secret. Those are his words, by the way. He described producing reams of policy analysis that could get him killed a hobby. And after Poland broke free, Balcerowicz was put in charge of the Polish economy. His hobby was no more, he'd gone pro. And so he set about reforming the economy. He ended price controls, stabilized the currency, and set about privatizing those state-owned industries. His reforms broadly followed the 1989 10-point plan known as the Washington Consensus. Similar reforms were done in the other Eastern Bloc countries and Russia itself. Because these reforms were so swift and drastic, they were known as shock therapy. So how'd it go? Well, fast forward through the 1990s, and it doesn't look great. Nothing was growing, except vodka consumption. By the year 2000, economic shock therapy looked as successful as actual shock therapy.
It really was a shock therapy. There was a huge unemployment. There was this hyperinflation. Everything was getting more expensive and more expensive.
Pundits launched broadsides against the reform. Famed economist Danny Roderick declared the Washington Consensus dead. And in 2007, Naomi Klein poured dirt on the grave with her book, The Shock Doctrine. That message was echoed within Poland as well. Populist politician Andrzej Leper had a 3-word slogan, Balcerowicz must go, and he called the Balcerowicz reforms economic genocide. But even against that backlash, the reforms stayed. Balcerowicz, ever the cross-country runner, pressed on.
We pushed through and kept the reforms going.
But it's not the 2000s anymore, it's the 2020s. We have 50 years of data on different reforms. With hindsight, what worked and what didn't. Well, some of that research is done by economist Justin Callais.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is very cool.
Professor Callais has published a number of papers on the topic, and he points to economic freedom being critical. So that leads to the question, what is economic freedom and can we measure it? The answer is yes. We do it with something called
The Economic Freedom of the World Index is made up of 5 different areas. The first being the size of government. The second area is legal systems and property rights. The third area is sound monetary policy. The fourth area is freedom to trade internationally. The fifth area is regulatory policies.
Of course, Justin knew the index by heart. Okay, so my understanding of the index is basically just trying to say how easy is it to start and maintain a business? Can you trade widely? Can you trust your currency? Like there won't be crazy inflation. So all the countries get scored on these 5 areas, that gets aggregated up, and now we have a ranking of all the countries in the world. Okay, but so what?
So economic freedom is highly and strongly correlated with economic growth, any measure of standards of living, life expectancy, even something like happiness, health outcomes.
So those are all pretty stunning effects, but just to be devil's advocate, those could just be correlations. Like, is it actually causal? If I go from being unfree economically to free, like Poland or other Eastern Bloc countries, do I actually improve?
Yes, so there's definitely a really strong causal relationship between the two as well, and I'll give 2 examples. One, if you just look at South and North Korea, that's kind of a good natural experiment.
What he means is, here we have 2 countries that were once one poor country in the 1950s. Same initial conditions. One chose economic freedom, the other chose central planning. Fast forward 70 years, and the South has money, megacities, exports cars, and K-pop, while the North has starvation, statues, and exports, cybercrimes, and counterfeit cash. Seriously, look into it. North Korea is really good at those 2 things.
It's a good example to show that even within an area that has similar cultural backgrounds, those institutions still play a strong role. And the second sort of piece of evidence I'll mention there is from Kevin and Robin Greer.
That's this paper, which shows that if you increase economic freedom and sustain it, basically, shock therapy, the Washington Consensus, works. Okay, so we have our 5 pillars of economic freedom. Do we need all of them? It's kind of a lot.
Turns out it's like a stool where you just need 3. See if you can guess which 3 are necessary.
Area 2, legal systems and property rights, tends to be the one that matters the most.
Honest courts, strong property rights. If you start a business and make a profit, you need to know some connected official or insider isn't going to be able to take it away.
Probably the second most important is sound monetary policy.
We can't have crazy inflation. Otherwise, contracts can't be made, loans can't be given out. We need price stability, sound money.
The third most, typically across the literature, seems to be freedom to trade internationally.
Our people need to be able to buy and sell stuff. The bigger the market, the better. So all 5 pillars of the Economic Freedom Index are great, but Justin is saying the research shows you just really need these 3 for growth. And yet, they don't always work.
So there's definitely cases of where those reforms don't always work. There's this interesting idea in political economy called the three-legged bar stool.
Ah, great. I'm going to need a whole other stool.
What Justin is talking about is economics is only one aspect of any reform. You also have culture and politics.
With politics, what matters is commitment to reform. Usually that requires democracy.
Whenever they do these reforms within a democracy, there is, an avenue of getting rid of the person if those reforms actually don't end up really taking place. You can always vote them out and hope that the next person actually implements the reforms. While in autocracy, you're just kind of hoping for the best.
The culture leg is much tougher.
Carrie Lawson and myself have this paper on when reforms fail. What we find is that there's about 9 or 10 cases where the reforms actually didn't work out. You're more likely to fail your reform when your culture isn't exactly kind of the ideal cultural backgrounds that lead to prosperity. These are things like, countries that have low levels of individualism and also countries with low levels of trust.
So we have a culture leg, a politics leg, and then an economics leg, which it itself has 3 legs. So it's a 3-legged stool on a 3-legged stool, a difficult and dangerous metaphor. So maybe we should use a different metaphor, like a recipe. Oh God. The things I do for economics, doing it, it's there, I did it.
So here is the research-approved simple recipe for growth. Step 1, get a vision, a goal, and have a way to commit to it. Step 2, lay down a foundation of sound money and strong courts. Step 3, sprinkle in the other pillars of economic freedom, trade, privatization, deregulation, and voila, you got yourself a rich country ready to serve.
Wow, the property rights flavor is excellent.
And you can tell the central bank's really independent.
Is that a hint of foreign direct investment that I'm tasting?
Sure is.
So Poland and Russia, how did they do with our model? Well, they show that even if you know the recipe, it's hard to follow it. First, commitment to reform. Poland benefited here because they had a 10-year-old movement called Solidarity that took power. This group had broad-based support. Also, they had a clear goal: grow the economy to join the EU. That created a culture of togetherness.
The situation wasn't great, but then on the larger scale, in 97 we joined NATO. No, in 97 we had the new constitution. Then we joined NATO, and then we started the negotiations to access European Union. So on a larger, let's say, cultural, psychological, political scale, we could observe that the situation is improving.
Meanwhile, in Russia, their empire, their ideology had just blown up. It seemed like the glory days were behind them. That created a half-hearted commitment to reform, and the culture was rife with despair. On money, Balcerowicz makes the central bank independent, and he gets inflation from 600% down to the teens in a couple of years. The money went from volatile to solid. Russia, on the other hand, tanked their currency. Viktor Gerashchenko printed money to bail out cronies. One economist called him the worst central banker ever. Here he is, signing money that became worthless due to his policies. How worthless? Well, Russians were using cigarettes instead of their own devalued money. The Marlboro Man does not a central banker make, although he is better than Viktor Gerashchenko.
After Balcerowicz reform, it was the inflation was pretty stabilized. And I think that in Russia, they had another crisis and another strong inflation period, which didn't build the trust of the people because, you make some reforms, but then you don't see any effects.
Back to Poland. They built out their court system.
I said something about the legal system because recently I was participating first time in Polish court. But before I entered the room with the clerks, the guy who was supposed to be part of this contest tried to bribe me.
Okay, so the courts are still a work in progress. But the key development was they passed an anti-monopoly law that made sure their markets would not be dominated by a few large companies.
Emerge of a lot of companies in the 90s. So every day, citizens with entrepreneurial spirit, they started their own businesses.
My fiance's father, he went to Germany to buy all kind of different stuffs, like toys, like household items, 2 full cars, let's say, of stuff. And then he sold it on so-called bazarki. It kind of reminded of the yard sales that you have in USA, I think.
Some of them didn't work out, but some of them transformed into really big companies.
He got his money from this kind of small jobs first. Then he moved to bigger containers that he ordered from China.
Meanwhile, elites and regular Russians flaunted the law. There was even a saying, yeah, the laws are strict, but at least you don't have to follow them. Russian officials found it difficult to walk a straight line, figuratively and literally. Finally, on economics, both countries opened to trade, got their markets going, and started to privatize their state-owned industries. But how that went down was totally different. In Russia, each citizen got a voucher that was an ownership stake in the state-owned industries, but they were confused by them. What were they worth? What were they supposed to do with them? So they traded them for cash and vodka. That allowed a few connected oligarchs to scoop up all the valuable oil and gas companies. By 1996, Boris Berezovsky, a mathematician turned car dealer, boasted he and 6 others controlled half the economy. Russia had swapped out rule by Communist Party insiders to another set of insiders. In Poland, Balcerowicz realized you couldn't sell off these government-owned industries quick. Nobody knew what they were worth, and the currency was volatile. So he went slow and built up the private sector first. By 2000, Poland's economic cake was ready to bake, while Russia's cake was, well, you know. Fast forward to the present, and Poland has absolutely cooked. Balcerowicz had won the long race. So there we are, and I don't want to make it seem like Poland is perfect. All 3 of our Polish people pointed out issues that Poland has, namely education. Their higher ed sector could be better. There is still corruption, as we saw with Timo in the court system. However, all 3 of them were very positive on Poland's future.
I'm definitely staying here in Poland because I like how the Poland is growing.
I'm optimistic because it's getting better.
The change in Poland was tremendous over this more than 30 years, because we started as a really poor country, and now it's a pretty strong economic in the region. So I hope we will be able to keep up and grow and become even stronger.
So Poland proves we know the steps, the recipe to wealth. In fact, every Eastern Bloc country that followed similar reforms grew immensely. The Washington Consensus shock therapy works. So why was it dismissed? Well, I think a lot of academics and journalists don't want economic freedom to succeed. They much prefer a more heavy-handed government like the Soviet system. So when they see an economically free Russia failing, they run with the story. Economists suck. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're doing.
But the research shows we do know what to do. It's just all these legs are necessary and hard. Sound money means not using the money printer. Rule of law means holding political insiders to the same standards as regular citizens. And that's just the economic stool. Committing to reform can be very difficult. Many Eastern Bloc countries backslid. And culture, well, that's the hardest of them all.
The kind of running joke is that, you call Williamson and you ask him, Oliver Williamson, you ask him, what should we do about the economy? And they'll say, like, all right, fix your culture, call me back in 1,000 years.
So like most things, knowing the steps is the easy part. Following them is hard. Now, I should mention one thing. The Washington Consensus actually might work better than what I've said in this video. That's because the data is biased against the Washington Consensus. Authoritarian countries often will inflate their statistics, and those are the statistics used in the research. I cover how those states cover up their data in this other video.